Right, well, we're back live now. Before we take our first question, I'd like to invite our panelists for their initial thoughts, having seen that interview now. Gerry, would you like to kick off, please?
Okay, thanks, David. There are a number of points I hope people took from Jayne's interview, such as due to the investment in training in local authority staff, they've proved that they're a multifunctional workforce, making them resilient during the toughest of times and when things change especially. And over the past few months, the services have definitely changed. Each and every local authority has adapted to serve our customers and others, including social care, patients and the homeless, from mainly the confines of schools to the wider community. And throughout the pandemic, it's been the goal of everyone involved to provide much needed food to those most vulnerable in our communities. And the most satisfying part of it is the genuine thanks and appreciation shown to our staff by those who have been served. And I think Jayne successfully described Assist FM has been a great conduit for the sharing of best practice, working with suppliers hand in hand, working with the Scottish Government and with everyone on board to provide the best solution for customers, really.
Excellent, thank you. Lindsay, your thoughts, please.
Thanks for that session with Jayne, David, that was great. I loved it when Jayne said masters of creativity, because that's exactly what the school food fraternity is all about. And also, I think for me, what I've seen in the last 16 weeks, I think, has been probably more compassion and understanding of food insecurity in Scotland and indeed in the whole of the UK. And the school meals service has absolutely stepped up to that. Recognition, I think, also of what the school meal service can do for its communities. And I think Jayne's point about integration in the future and better recognition of what people do and integration with other services is definitely something. The Scottish Government has set up a social renewal advisory board, and it has 8 priorities, and one of them is access to food. So Jayne is very kindly on the policy circle for that, advising government. So it's very much in government's view as food insecurity.
Okay, thank you. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would completely agree with what Lindsay and Gerry both have said. I think, you know, the most important thing, I think, for me, certainly going into this and coming out of it is the communication, is to keep talking. I think that's the most important thing that hopefully we can carry on into August and beyond, you know, is about the communication, not only through events like this and sharing ideas across the public sector, different organisations. It's also through assisting the seminars and webinars to bring local authorities together, because we're all dealing with the same problem. And so sharing advice and best practice is really been crucial to that. I think also communication with our suppliers. Already they've come with really innovative ideas, great solutions to problems that possibly we didn't even know were going to exist. So a big hats off to them. Also communication round to our schools, education partners and third sector organisations. And I think that's going to be key for us going into August, is local authorities being able to provide reassurance to parents that the school meal service is safe, to not only increase our uptake, but to give that confidence in the service that we provide. And finally, really just to echo Jayne's comments around suppliers, I think you know, the supply chain, the support from both our small suppliers and our national frameworks has been pretty incredible over the last 3-4 months. And I think that's all credit to local authorities and to Assist for really working hard to make suppliers feel part of us as organisations, and really to give them a seat at the table through the likes of some suppliers being sitting on our committee as well. And I think that's been a huge benefit to us.
Great, thank you. Gerry, if I can turn to you now. I know you've had a chance to see a couple of questions already that you've had a go at answering, but just to sort of, perhaps we can just elaborate a little bit there, because there does seem to be a little bit of confusion about what changes are happening and when. Would you mind just sort of briefly going through that to clear that up for us, please?
Yes, the new regulations have been paused in Scotland and will not now come into effect until April 2021. So we'll all wipe our brow at that and say thank the Lord because of the last few months what we went through. But it's really common sense that we would not have been ready in time. So that's a great relief. So I see there's a question about no ham sandwiches. There will be ham sandwiches. The service as a whole from the 11th of August will mainly be the same, but we will await confirmation on the 30th of July as to how the schools are actually going to return. At this moment in time, as Jayne said, the Scottish Government have said that all schools will return on the 11th of August, but we don't know the actual specifics of how we will be delivering the catering service. So there will probably be deliveries to classrooms. We don't know the specifics yet. Sorry for not being more clear than that.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay, in the interview, Jayne talked about the sort of malnutrition of children, among children, and hospitalisation. And I just wondered whether the plans to extend free meals to preschool children is going to go, do you believe, in any way towards helping to alleviate that situation?
And you know my long-term views on this, David. I've been campaigning for free holiday provision for a long time, but also I think my personal view and something I would really like to see post COVID would be a period of free school meals for all children. Just because I think we have no vaccine yet. We don't know what the future holds, and even when we do get a vaccine, it may be up to a year before the whole population is vaccinated against COVID. And also the World Economic Forum has told us that we have future pandemics. I think for ease of delivery and also for confidence for parents and schools and for public health reasons, I think it would be much better if all children had access to free school meals, even if it was for a certain period of time until we stabilised as a country again. So I mean, I welcome all the UK government regions putting money into holiday provision while the schools are closed, but we may have spikes in the future, and we need to know, you know, some consistency of delivery in the longer term. We also will have so many families who will be going and applying for free school meals in the future. So we're going to have thousands and thousands of families. I think Wales has seen at least 5,000 in the last few weeks just applying for free school meals. So there's an unknown shift there in poverty and what families will be needing. And for me, school meals is an absolute essential part of education. Without it, schools just wouldn't function, and kids wouldn't function, and their families would be in dire straits. So I'd love to see free school meals, certainly for a couple of years even, in policy, and I think it would make a lot of sense to do something like that. The reality of it is a lot of it's down to finance. So I think we need to be a little bit more creative in the ways that we're thinking about. So extending eligibility might be something worth thinking about for those on universal credit. But the bottom line was what Jayne said earlier on about getting hot meals into children. I think they're going to have, a lot of them will have been living on sandwiches and cold meals for the last few weeks. So and communicating that to parents, how it is going to be a safe, good environment for the children to get back to is something essential. I just want to tell you, I met two young teenagers just a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to them about how important going back to school was. One was called Lucy and one was called Sophie. And they said to me, I said, what's important about going back to school? And one of them said to me, it's going to be the social thing of seeing our friends again. They both mentioned lunchtime. And one of them, who was 14, said to me, I don't want to go back to reading, writing, and arithmetic. She said, I want to go back to workshops. I don't know how to turn on a cooker. She said, I want to learn all these things, but I want to learn how to live again. We need to learn how to live again. And eating socially together is part of learning how to live.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we've got a number of questions that I wanted to try and run through now. And Jayne, I hope you don't mind if I sort of throw you a slightly technical one from Stephen Forster, Chair of LACER, who asks about the sugar reductions in the new standards. how are they going to be reflected in the guidelines? And he asked specifically about whether fruit will be restricted within the dessert options. Could you have a go at that one for us?
Sure. So because these changes affect not just the content, as in reduction in fat and sugar and red processed meat, but also there's an element of the nutritional analysis part of it. It will impact it in two ways. So the desserts will have to meet certain standards, and it won't be able to contain beyond a certain amount of fat and sugar, for instance. So if you put fruit into a dessert, it's obviously going to increase the sugar content overall. So it's a bit of a difficult one, and I know there are some teams across Scotland testing out a number of recipes just now to try to get some home made desserts that will comply with the new standards. The other big part of it is, as I already said in the interview, fruit juice is a thing of the past. So where at breakfast time fruit juice was always a good way of getting fruit into our children and young people, that won't be permitted anymore, and neither will fruit-based smoothies.
Okay, thank you. Chris, if I can turn to you now. Good question about the sort of the anticipated changes that we might be seeing in the way that you actually deliver meals. Perhaps an increase in grab and go, delivery of meals to classrooms, social distancing, classes remaining in their bubbles. What do you anticipate seeing in the way of changes to the way perhaps meals were delivered before?
I think really this has shown how adaptable local authority caterers are, in that, you know, we started working on models for 50% occupancy. We're now working on models for 100% return. So it's constantly evolving. Assist have done a lot of work through our Hands on Hungry subgroup to bring together different models of delivery. And that will be confirmed hopefully after John Swinney's announcement later in July. But it is likely that we will see a grab and go service. Certainly in our high schools, we're looking to reduce cash. So it is more a grab, go and potentially eat within social bubbles. Delivery to classrooms is likely, as Gerry touched upon earlier, to reduce the risk of any spread within our within the dining hall or dining facilities. So I think that's something that we're certainly working on, and it will evolve as we go across. But I think the fundamental, and Lindsay touched upon it as well, is as local authority caterers, our kind of number one goal is to ensure that we provide the best service to our pupils. And we will do whatever it takes to deliver that, and whatever model it looks like. And I think that's all credit to all local authorities and to all public sector organisations who are all working to do the same thing, as provide a nutritionally balanced lunch to all, and most especially to those in most need. Okay,
thank you. Gerry, someone's got a question here, Angela Tregear, asking about the response of suppliers, both the big national suppliers and the small local suppliers, to the challenges that you faced. Asking really about what their contribution has been. Has it been good enough? And how do you see the relationship developing once schools return?
I think it's actually been great, and the reason I say that is we had a conference with a session with suppliers in Edinburgh in November, I think it was, and the room was packed out, and it was really in relation to the new regulations. And since then, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a webinar, and the fact that 65 suppliers came onto that webinar, it was an open question and answer session that everybody contributed to. The feedback from it was that suppliers got great ideas out of it. From the local authority perspective, we get great ideas out of it. And the fact that we're working hand in hand with each other, when people communicate with each other, we can overcome anything. And that has been really, really positive, from small suppliers right through to our largest national suppliers. So we're very, very fortunate that we have that ongoing relationship, and I'm sure everybody would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Jayne, if I can turn to you now. Gerry breathed a bit of a sigh of relief earlier that about the sort of postponement of the new standards until April next year, but it still doesn't give you a lot. And I know that you have some concerns about the impact on the service to the changes that you're being asked to make. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that for us?
Sure, it's the range and the scale of the changes that's coming online, and it's coming on in one fell swoop. So it's changing virtually everything about every element of a school meal, perhaps more significantly in our secondary schools than in our primaries. But when you're looking at changes to red and red processed meat, you're looking at changes to things like the bread options. That's where earlier there was a reference to ham sandwiches. Those are the kind of things we will find difficult to provide now. So some things that we think of as safe foods for our children, we know that they like them and they're very popular, will be very difficult to provide. There are then the changes to the fruit and veg, which is a really good thing. There's some positive changes there where we're looking at increasing the provision of fruit and vegetables across the school day. And that's really the other big change for us, is that this isn't just a lunchtime change. All of these regulations will take effect across the whole school day: breakfast, mid-morning, lunch, and all of the food that's provided in school, not by the caterers necessarily. So tuck shops that are perhaps run as pupil enterprises will also have to follow these guidance. So it's a big change, and it's coming in a very short space of time. And some of that will require reformulation and redevelopment of products so that we can enable choice. So that's really where we perhaps have our biggest concerns, is being able to maintain that element of choice for our pupils so that they will continue to remain with us on site. And the last time round, when the food and drink regulations came in 2007, for some of those big changes, we had a step change approach. So there was a target to reach a certain salt level by a certain date, and then it increased for a future date. This time that's not happening. It's everything at once and everything by April. So it's the combination. It's the fact that it affects across the whole school day, and it's the totality of it in such a short space of time that's going to be a challenge.
Okay, Chris, if I can get you to answer what seems to be a fairly sort of technical question here from Robert Clark. Do your frozen food wholesalers have your forward orders for the start of the new term? Which I guess is not all that far away, because we're talking about August the 11th, aren't we?
Yeah, it's that one's a fairly straightforward one to answer. Yes, yeah, we place all our orders before the end of term. There might be some adjustment over the summer period, but yes, all our suppliers will have forward orders.
Excellent. Okay, Lindsay, one of the things that has happened during the lockdown is been shown by several examples where schools have been able to provide meals for people who need them in the local community. Is that something that we can look to build on, do you believe, in the future? Is there some way communities can benefit from the experience that we've gained from the lockdown in doing this?
Absolutely, David. I think for me, the big thing for me now is what I would call community provision. And COVID has very much been about community provision, and that's what I've seen across Scotland and indeed in parts of England. I think we have an opportunity, and Jayne alluded to earlier on, as well as challenges, we have opportunities. And that is something certainly that we're looking at on the Scottish Government Social Renewal Board as to what community provision might look like. We have an amazing cohort of skilled and experienced catering staff who not only feed our children, but have been feeding our communities and looking after our communities, particularly our very elderly and vulnerable and shielding families. So I think there's a massive opportunity here for something that I would badge as community provision, to more utilise what are our public spaces, because I think in certain areas, school meals might be under threat from something like COVID, but I definitely think that food, mental health, and digital technology are the three areas that, and Jayne alluded to that as well, where there will be some significant investment. And I think looking at community provision, like Meals on Wheels, we've got homeless, we've got women's aid sort of shelters and things like that. Vulnerable groups are going to need food, and they're going to need food for the next couple of years at least. So expanding our services, or expanding your services to be able to give that community provision, is something I definitely see in the future, definitely.
Excellent. Okay. Gerry, we've got a question here, which is looking at sort of disposable items, service and tableware. Obviously, the new sort of regime that you'll have to operate under is very much about sort of hygiene and safety. But does that mean that there's a bit of a compromise with sustainability and maybe some of the targets that have been set?
I'm not going to give the politically correct answer, unfortunately, because, as you mentioned there, safety comes first. So therefore, it is quite a straight answer. The commitment to sustainability and zero waste remains. However, it will be compromised in the short term.
Yep. Okay. No way around that.
No.
Now, next up, we have just a thought, actually, that Jayne, maybe I can turn to you for this one. August 11th isn't really very far away. What's the sense you're getting from Assist members about their sort of looking forward to, trepidation? What's their sort of sense with the new term just a few weeks away now?
A bit of both of that, to be fair, David. I think there's a lot of people looking forward to getting our services back, getting our staff back where they've been off, and getting it back to feeding our children and young people those hot, healthy meals that Lindsay has been very clear about, you know, the need to get those out there. So I think there's a real drive to make it happen. But we are still standing on shifting sand, and it's very difficult to plan when we're not 100% sure on what we're planning for. A couple of people have referenced as well, the Deputy First Minister in Scotland is due to make an announcement on the 30th of July, and along with that there will be guidance as to how schools will reopen. That gives us 11 days and fewer working days than 11, so it's not long to turn that guidance and advice into practical methods of delivery. So we're in a really precarious position just now. We did have information yesterday. Yesterday, the Deputy First Minister published the scientific advice on social distancing in schools and the basis on which schools will return. And that guidance has given us a slight steer in the direction of what we can expect. So it has said that there will be no social distancing among pupils, no requirement for them to social distance. However, adults and children and adults will have to socially distance. So we know that will have to be the case in our kitchens, and we will have to plan for that. But in terms of what that service looks like, and Gerry and Chris have both said, you know, we're still not entirely sure what that will look like come the 11th of August. It's clear that the limitations on group gatherings, which for us means your dining hall and how many children we can get sitting, eating in that dining hall, will depend on the advice at the time around group gatherings and the numbers that will be permitted. So, like I said, masters of creativity. We have plan A, we have plan B, we have plan C, and they will just continue to evolve. We will not be putting plans in pen. The plans will continue to be in pencil right up, I think, until the 10th of August and beyond.
Okay. Chris, in the interview, Jayne talked about technology and how in the future we're really going to need to sort of look at how we can best use that. Do you have any sort of thoughts, maybe any examples from your own experience of how you might get technology to help you deliver school catering in the future?
I think it's a fantastic point that Jayne raised. I think we're all in local authorities now looking at the future. Certainly, you know, looking at an ageing workforce and how we then implement technology to work alongside our ageing workforce and also to bring up new talent. And it's something that across all local authorities, and especially Edinburgh, we're looking at how we can bring in new equipment that will save on labour, but that will make the meal service more efficient. Jayne spoke briefly about the 1140 nursery expansion. So that's around about a 25% increase to all our meals. So for Edinburgh, that's around about 10,000 additional meals per day. So we have to work with our suppliers in terms of our equipment suppliers to look at, well, how can we use the existing space, because our spaces aren't going to grow? How do we use the existing space to deliver more meals from our kitchens and make life easier for our staff or as easy as possible? And that's certainly something that a lot of suppliers are now kind of really coming to the mark with and bringing us innovation, bringing us ideas. And we're more than happy across Scotland to try any new products and share that across the Assist network.
Excellent. Okay. Right. I think it might be a good opportunity now, while we've got a few minutes left, just to sort of go around the panel and get you to just give us your sort of closing thoughts, with the idea looking firmly in the future. We've talked about, you know, August the 11th and such like, but perhaps if you could just sort of give your answer some scope that looks slightly beyond that, sort of 6 months, a year, or even further ahead. Gerry, how about you?
I'm really hoping that this opens up doors for local authority. We've showed our worth during this pandemic. We are going into the future with confidence and a spring in our step. Just to touch on a thing that Chris said there, we're moving into the big, bold world of a mobile app come the August 11th, where in every secondary school in South Lanarkshire, kids will be able to pre-order through a mobile app, which is quite a big step, and we are fully committed to that. Just because the situation has arisen whereby we're trying to reduce cash handling, so we are moving into the future, but there is great opportunity for the public sector at this point. We have shown our worth within schools for many, many years, and the importance of the work we do. And during the pandemic, we've had an opportunity to just expand that a little to those in need, the elderly, the homeless, and those most vulnerable. So we are looking forward. Chris touched on it, Jayne touched on it. Communication is the key, and we have a great network now, and we're a powerful, powerful voice when we're together. And so I see the future as being really bright.
Great. Lindsay, how about you? Obviously, some fairly troubling times that we're having to sort of live through right now, but do you retain a sense of optimism about the future?
I'm always optimistic, David. Always. We can't be anything else. You know, what have we got if we don't have hope, for goodness sake? I think in the future we'll see more multi-sectoral working, because that's definitely happened over the last few months. Some of it should have been happening a decade ago, but it's happened now. So there's been some good silver lining and all that. I think we need to build on those community resilience groups and networks, and the communication is absolutely key. How we message to the public needs to be smart, to show the heroes that have been doing great stuff, but also about the new services that have evolved. So I think public messaging is incredibly important, and what we say about how wonderful our service is and how fantastic the hot meal is on the plate. And also for our local producers and providers and suppliers, you know, what they have to offer by ways of employment and sustainability in our food chain. And the last thing, I suppose, for me is involving our children and young people. I'm really passionate that they are the next generation of consumers, of workers, of voters, of everything else to do with our food system. So we really need to engage with them, and I would urge that, you know, as from day one and onwards.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Chris, how about you?
I think similar to what all the panelists have said today, I think us as local authorities previously have always been a bit nervous about putting our head above the parapet and saying, you know what, we are doing great things, you know, we are moving things forward. And I'm hoping that as a result of this, we are more inclined to do that and celebrate success and celebrate, you know, our staff who go out day after day and deliver a fantastic service. So for me, really, I'm hoping it is putting the spotlight back on local authorities. It's about, Jayne summed it up very nicely, it's about putting the school kitchen or any kitchen at the heart of the community, because that's what this pandemic has done. It's brought communities together through food and through, you know, trying to get through it together. And I just don't want us to lose that, because as a society, it's so quick that we move on to the next thing. But I think there's a lot of good that's came from this, and I think we should remember that.
Great, thank you. And Jayne, finally, if I can turn to you. I mean, there's a fair amount of sort of optimism amongst your co-panelists here. I guess you share that as well, do you?
Yeah, I can't be the voice of doom and gloom, because it's just not something I see. And like everyone has said, I think everyone's stolen my notes and just yeah. But that's exactly what I see, is that the lessons that we can take that are still emerging from the emergency work that has happened is doom and gloom around that level of need and that level of requirement and that standard of food insecurity that is across the UK. And that's devastating to have that being brought to the fore. But now that we have that staring us in the face, we need to do something about it. And we have a bit of a once in a lifetime opportunity to do that. Lindsay has mentioned that we have the food circle through the social advisory work that Scottish Government has instigated. So we have the chance to grab this and do something about it. And I also think we need to do that not to our children and young people, but with our children and young people and with our communities. I'm sure many people perhaps on this webinar today were also part of the webinar earlier in the week where the Children's Right to Food Charter was relaunched, and I was so inspired by the voices of our children and young people who understand the issues, have ideas about what the solutions are, and can teach us a thing or two as to how to achieve it. So for me, one of the biggest lessons for the next year will be not just us trying to deliver better for our communities and for our children and young people, and that needs to be done by decision makers, but it has to be done in partnership with our children and young people. So I plan to listen a lot more over the next 6 to 12 months.
That sounds like good advice for everyone. That, I'm afraid, everyone, is the end of the webinar for today. My thanks to everyone who's been able to join us today, but especially to our panelists, Jayne, Lindsay, Gerry and Chris. To remind you, there will be a link to the full recording of this webinar available on Monday on the Public Sector Catering website. We take a break in our webinar programme now over the summer, but we'll be back with our next look at the Future of Your Service webinar on September the 10th, when Sue Cawthray, Chair of the National Association of Care Catering, will join us to look at the challenges facing the care sector. Lastly, a word of thanks to the suppliers who support the Public Sector Catering 100 group, and without whom events such as today's webinar would not be possible. You can see their names on the slide that follows. See you in September. Goodbye.